The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than most cities Kehoe had seen in his 60 years of life. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top, and the walls were made of crystal that showed the stars outside. The massive round table in the center could seat 10,000 beings from across the galaxy, and today every seat was Phaled Kehoe. Sat in the human section with his small team of 5 people. They looked tiny compared to the other groups around. The table, the Reptari had brought 50 representatives with scales that changed color when they got angry. The bird-like Aviari filled an entire section with their bright feathers and sharp beaks. The Mineraloids looked like walking mountains of precious gems, and their section glowed with inner light. He leaned close to Kehoe and whispered in Korean, so the translators would not pick it up. She was young, and this was her first big council meeting, but she was smart and Kehoe trusted her completely. Her dark eyes were worried as she looked around at all the alien faces staring at them. The elephant-like Pachani were trumpeting loudly in their section, making sounds that hurt human ears. The fish-like Aquatic Federation representatives sat in water tanks that bubbled and hissed. The tall, thin Savani looked like elves from old Earth stories, but their eyes were cold and calculating as they watched the humans. Every species in the galaxy was here today, and they all seemed angry about something. Kehoe had been doing this job for 20 years, and he had never seen so many species united about anything. Usually they fought with each other about trade routes or mining rights, or who got to explore which star systems, but today they all seemed to agree on one thing, and that thing was humanity. The Reptari Prime Speaker stood up first. His scales turned bright red, which meant he was very angry. His long tongue flicked out to taste the air, and his yellow eyes focused on the human section like a snake looking at a mouse. Humans spread too fast, he said in his hissing voice. They take planets we want. They build cities where we plan to build cities. They mine asteroids we marked as ours. They do not ask permission. They just take what they want. The Aviari chief nest mother ruffled her blue and gold feathers and screeched her agreement. Her voice was like metal scraping on metal. Humans fight too much, she said. They have wars on their own world, and they bring war to space. They solve problems with weapons instead of words. They are dangerous to peaceful species like us. Kehoe almost laughed at that. The Aviari had been fighting a war with the insectoid hives for 300 years and showed no signs of wanting peace. The Reptari had invaded 6 different worlds in the past decade, but somehow humanity was the dangerous one. The crystalline mineraloids spoke next in voices that sounded like music, but the words were not friendly. Humans dig too deep. They sang in harmony. They take metals and gems from worlds that are not theirs. They do not respect the ancient agreements about mining rights. They change the landscape without permission. One by one, every major species stood up to complain about humanity. The machine-like collective said humans built too many robots. The plant-like Florari said humans cleared too many forests. The energy beings called Luminous said humans used too much power. The complaints went on and on for hours. Shawan was taking notes on her tablet, but Kehoe told her to stop. There was no point in recording. This was not a real trial or debate. It was a show. The decision had already been made before they walked into this room. All of this talking was just so the aliens could feel better about what they were going to do. The worst part was that Kehoe knew most of the complaints were not really wrong. Humans did expand fast. They did build cities and mines and farms on planets other species wanted. They did fight wars and use weapons to solve problems they could not solve with words, but that was not why the aliens were angry. The real reason was much simpler. Humans were good at things other species were not good at. Human ships were faster than alien ships. Human weapons were better than alien weapons. Human colonies were more successful than alien colonies. Human traders made more money than alien traders. In just 200 years since first contact, humans had become one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and the older species did not like that. The Savani Prime Minister stood up last. She was tall and beautiful like all her people, with long silver hair and eyes like purple jewels. She spoke in a voice that was smooth as silk but cold as ice. We have found a solution to the human problem, she said. We propose that humanity be contained to their home system. All human colonies outside the Sol system must be abandoned within 1 galactic year. All human ships must return to Earth. Space, all human citizens living on other worlds must go home. The galaxy will be safer without human expansion. The hall exploded with noise. Every alien voice joined together in agreement. The sound was like thunder, and it went on for 10 minutes. Kehoe felt like he was sitting in the middle of a storm. The translator devices were overloaded and started smoking from trying to process so many different languages at once. When the noise finally died down, the voting began. Kehoe watched as species after species voted yes to the containment proposal. The numbers appeared on the big screens around the hall. 847 species voted to lock humanity in their home system. 23 abstained, which meant they did not vote. Either way, 0 voted against the proposal. Not one single species in the entire galaxy had voted to support humanity. Not even the ones who traded with humans or had human friends or owed their lives to human soldiers who had saved them in past wars. When it came down to it, every alien species in the galaxy would rather see humanity locked away than share space with them. The vote was final. Humanity was banished from the galaxy. Kehoe felt strangely calm as he stood up the other humans in. His delegation stood with him. Haywan looked like she was going to cry. The young diplomat Minho was shaking with anger. The old general Taesung looked like he wanted to fight every alien in the room, but Kehoe just felt tired. He reached up and unpinned the small silver badge from his jacket. It was his translator device, the thing that let him understand all the different alien languages and let them understand him. When he placed it on the table, it made a small clicking sound that somehow seemed very loud in the huge, quiet hall. One by one, the other humans did the same. Haywan was crying now as she put down her translator. Minho slammed his down on the table so hard it cracked. Taesung placed his down gently like he was laying a weapon on a grave. The old scientist Sunya just sighed and added hers to the pile. We understand your decision, Kehoe said in perfect Standard Galactic, the common language all species used for official business. His accent was flawless, which surprised many of the aliens who thought he needed the translator to speak their language. Humanity withdraws from the Galactic Council effective immediately. He continued, we will collect our people and our belongings and return to our home system as you have requested. We will not cause trouble. We will not resist. We will simply leave. The silence that followed was complete. No alien spoke, no translator buzzed, no chair creaked. Every being in that vast hall was absolutely still. They had expected anger. They had expected threats. They had expected the humans to beg or bargain or demand another vote. Instead, they got calm acceptance, and somehow that was much more frightening. Kehoe turned and walked toward the exit. His team followed behind him. Their footsteps echoed in the silence as they reached the great doors. Kehoe stopped and looked back at the thousands of alien faces staring at them. You have made your choice, he said quietly. We will make ours then. The humans walked out of the Galactic Council for the last time, leaving behind a room full of aliens who were just beginning to realize they might have made a terrible mistake. 3 days after the vote, Admiral Taemin stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars through the massive viewing window. He was a big man with gray hair and scars on his hands from old battles. His uniform was simple and clean without the fancy decorations that alien officers loved to wear. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp and focused. The message came through on all channels at exactly the same time. It was short and simple, but every human colony, ship, mining station, research base and trading post in the galaxy received it within minutes. The encryption was so advanced that alien intelligence services would need years to break it, but the message itself was not secret. Pack everything, we are going home. Taemin had been expecting this order for months, maybe years. The signs had been there for anyone smart enough to read them. The increasing hostility from alien governments, the trade restrictions, the mysterious accidents that happened to human ships in certain sectors, the way alien security forces always seemed to arrive just a little too late when human civilians needed help. But even he was surprised by how fast everything happened on Kepler 442b. Dr. Sunya was packing up the xenobiology research station. That had been her home for 8 years. She was a small woman with kind eyes who had spent her life studying alien plant life. She had discovered dozens of new species and written papers that had helped feed hungry worlds across the galaxy. But now she was destroying her life's work. Her team of 30 scientists worked through the night, loading equipment into cargo containers. Every computer drive was wiped clean, every sample was sealed, and packed away. Every piece of research that could help other species was either taken or destroyed. The aliens watching from their observation posts could not understand what they were seeing. Why are they destroying everything? A Reptari spy asked his handler they could sell that information for billions of credits. Why throw it away? The handler did not have an answer. The humans were not acting like any species he had studied. They were not trying to profit from their forced departure. They were not even trying to hurt their enemies. They were just leaving completely and quietly. Dr. Sunya walked through the empty laboratory one last time. Every surface was clean, every drawer was empty. Every screen was dark. It looked like no one had ever worked there at all. She felt sad, but also strangely relieved. It was time to go home. On the industrial world of Proxima 7, factory manager Dong-Su supervised the shutdown of the largest manufacturing complex in this sector. The facility covered an area the size of a small city and employed 50,000 humans. It produced everything from computer chips to medical devices to the advanced materials that made faster than light travel possible. Half the galaxy depended on products made in this factory. The waiting list for production slots was 3 years long. Alien corporations had been begging to buy the facility for decades, but humanity had always refused. Now, they were just walking away from it. Dong-Su was a practical man who understood numbers and systems. He had spent 15 years building this factory into something amazing. He had trained workers and installed machines and created supply chains that reached across the galaxy. Shutting it all down felt like cutting off his own arm, but he followed his orders. Every machine was powered down, every worker was given a ticket home. Every contract was canceled, every alien business partner was told the same thing: sorry, we are closing permanently. The aliens tried to understand what was happening. Teams of economists studied the factory closure and could not make sense of it. The facility was profitable, the location was perfect, the workers were skilled. Why would anyone abandon such a valuable asset? Maybe they planned to come back, a Sylvani analyst suggested. Maybe this is all a negotiation tactic. They want us to offer them better terms. But as days passed and more human facilities shut down, it became clear this was not a negotiation, it was an exodus. Commander Yun SEO received over 300 communication requests in the first week after the vote. Every alien military leader in the sector wanted to know where the human fleet was going, what their plans were, whether they intended to cause trouble on their way out. She ignored every single message. Her ship, the battlecruiser Iron Will, was one of 50 human warships in this sector. They had been patrolling trade routes and keeping pirates away from merchant convoys for years. The alien governments had complained that human ships were too aggressive, too ready to fight, but they had never complained about the results. Human patrols meant safe shipping, and safe shipping meant profit. Now, the human ships were leaving, and already the pirates were getting bolder. 3 merchant convoys had been attacked. In the past week, the alien patrol ships that tried to replace the humans were slower, less armed, and frankly not very good at their job. Cyan SEO felt sorry for the alien merchants, who would suffer, but that was not her problem anymore. Her orders were clear: return to Sol System immediately, do not engage alien forces, do not respond to requests for assistance, do not interfere with local conflicts. The withdrawal was happening on every level at the same time. Human merchants packed up their shops and canceled their contracts. Human doctors finished treating their patients and then left. Human teachers said goodbye to their alien students. Human engineers handed over their projects to confused alien replacements who did not understand how anything worked. On the university world of academia, Prime Professor Yujin of the Sylvani Institute watched her human colleagues pack up their offices. She had worked with them for years on projects that were supposed to change the galaxy. They were so close to breakthroughs in faster-than-light communication, artificial intelligence, and energy generation. But now the humans were taking all their research with them. Please stay, she begged Dr. Jin Wu, who had been her partner on the communication project. We are so close to success. Just give us 6 more months. Jin Wu was a quiet man who rarely spoke, but when he did, people listened. He had ideas that no one else had. He saw patterns that others missed. He asked questions that led to discoveries. I'm sorry, he said as he sealed the last of his research files. The data belongs to humanity. We developed it with human resources on human time. If other species want this technology, they can develop it themselves, but that could take decades, Eugen protested. We might never figure it out without your insights. Jinwoo looked sad, but his voice was firm. That is not my problem anymore. The same scene played out on research stations across the galaxy. Human scientists were packing up and leaving, taking with them centuries of accumulated knowledge. The alien researchers left behind suddenly realized how much they had depended on human insights and human questions and human ways of thinking about problem trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades began to fall apart. Human cargo ships had been the backbone of interstellar commerce. They were fast, reliable, and their captains knew every shortcut through hyperspace. The alien ships that tried to replace them got lost, broke down, or simply could not handle the complex navigation required for efficient shipping. Shipping costs doubled, then tripled. Delivery times that had been measured in days now took weeks. Some remote colonies stopped receiving regular supply shipments altogether. The Galactic Commerce Board called emergency meetings, but nobody knew how to fix the problems. We need to contact Earth, a desperate trade official suggested. Maybe we can work out some kind of deal. But when they tried to send messages to the Sol system, something strange happened. The communications simply vanished. It was not that the humans were refusing to answer. The messages never seemed to arrive at all. It was as if Earth had disappeared from the galaxy 6 months after the vote. The withdrawal was nearly complete. Millions of humans had packed up their lives and gone home to a solar system that most aliens had never paid much attention to. The galaxy felt different somehow, quieter, less busy, less connected, and in the growing silence, some alien leaders were beginning to ask themselves a question they should have asked before the vote. What exactly had humanity been doing out here, and who was going to do it now that they were gone? The answer to that question would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would terrify them all. 8 months had passed since the humans left, and BORAM was starting to panic. The Merchant Guild meeting room was filled with angry voices and the smell of fierce sweat from a dozen different species. The holographic displays showed shipping routes in red, which meant they were failing. Trade profits were down 60% and getting worse. Every day BORAM had been a trade representative for 20 years. She had seen recessions and wars and natural disasters, but nothing like this. The galaxy was slowly falling apart, and nobody seemed to know how to fix it. The humans used to handle the difficult routes, she explained to the emergency council meeting. Her voice was shaking because she knew how bad this sounded. They had ships that could navigate the asteroid fields near Vega. They knew the safe passages through the nebula clusters. Their captains had memorized the hyperspace currents that change every few months. Now we have to use alien ships that get lost in normal space, she continued. The Reptari freighters are too slow. The aviary vessels keep breaking down. The mineraloid barges cannot handle the gravity wells near gas giants. We are losing money on every shipment. The worst part was the outer rim. The frontier territories had always been dangerous, but human security contractors had kept the peace for decades. They were tough and well-armed, and most importantly, they were not afraid to fight. Pirates and raiders had learned to avoid systems where humans were on patrol, but now the humans were gone and the old violence was coming back. Commander Hyuk-soo of the Insectoid Defense Force was leading his hive ships toward Reptari territory again. The war between their species had been frozen for 50 years because human peacekeepers had forced both sides to honor the ceasefire, but the humans were not there to stop them anymore. The Reptari colonies on the border worlds were poorly defended. Their military had gotten soft during the long peace. They sent desperate messages to the Galactic Council begging for help, but the Council had no army of its own. They had always relied on human forces to handle military problems. President Min called another emergency session, but fewer species showed up than before. Everyone was dealing with their own problems. The aviari were fighting pirates who had taken over 3 star systems. The mineraloids were losing mining stations to raiders. The peaceful Aquatic Federation was being invaded by the machine collectives who wanted their water worlds. We need to contact Earth, Min said for the 5th time in 2 months. Someone must be able to reach the humans. We need to negotiate a new agreement, but every attempt to communicate with the Sol system failed. The messages just disappeared into space like they were being absorbed by something. The few scout ships that tried to approach Earth space never came back. The entire human home system seemed to be surrounded by some kind of barrier that nobody understood. Yujin was having the worst year of her life. The advanced research project she had been working on with human scientists was completely dead without their input. She stared at equations that made no sense and experimental results that seemed impossible. The humans had been asking questions that led to breakthroughs, but now she did not even know what questions to ask. We are like children trying to understand adult conversations. She told her research team the humans saw patterns we could not see. They understood connections we missed. Without them, we are just guessing and hoping for luck. Her colleague, Dr. Wu Jin from the Physics Institute, was having similar problems. His project to develop better hyperspace engines had ground to a halt. The human researchers had been working on theoretical frameworks that were years ahead of anything the aliens had. They had shared some of their knowledge but kept the most important parts to themselves. Maybe they knew this would happen, Wu Jin said quietly. Maybe they always planned to leave and they did not want us to have their best technology. The idea was disturbing, but it made sense. The humans had been very careful about what information they shared. They had been generous with basic science and medical knowledge, but their most advanced military and space travel technology had always remained human. Only trade representative BORAM was looking at shipping reports that made her sick. Pirate attacks were up 400%. Several major trade routes had been abandoned completely because they were too dangerous. The galactic economy was sliding toward collapse, and nobody knew how to stop it. We could try to hire mercenaries, someone suggested, but the best mercenary companies were human-owned, and they left with everyone else. What about building our own security forces? BORAM asked. The military experts just laughed. It would take decades to train new forces and years to build the ships they would need. The humans had been providing security for so long that most species had forgotten how to protect themselves. On the research world of academia, Prime Professor Yujin made a discovery that chilled her to the bone. She was going through old human research files that had been left behind, and she found something that should not have existed. It was a report about something called the Void Spawn, ancient creatures that lived in the space between galaxies. The report was dated 3 years ago, but it described these creatures as if they were a known threat. The humans had been studying them and preparing defenses against them, but nobody else in the galaxy had ever heard of the Void Spawn. Yujin called an emergency meeting with the other senior researchers. When she showed them the files, the room went silent. The implications were terrifying. If the humans had known about a major threat to the galaxy, why had they not told anyone? Why had they kept it secret? Unless, Professor Chun-Li said slowly, they were protecting us from something we were not ready to handle. The files described creatures of enormous size and power that could consume entire star systems. Human research suggested these things appeared every few thousand years, and that only coordinated action by multiple species could drive them away, but the coordination required military leadership and advanced technology that only humanity possessed. Maybe that is why they expanded so fast. Chun-Li continued. Maybe they were not being greedy. Maybe they were trying to build defenses. Yujin felt sick as she read more of the files. The human military buildup, their aggressive exploration, their insistence on controlling certain strategic systems, it all looked different now. What if they had not been trying to dominate the galaxy? What if they had been trying to protect it? Deep space monitoring stations began reporting strange readings in the void between galaxies. Something was moving out there in the darkness, something big. The signals were faint and hard to understand, but they seemed to be getting stronger. The Galactic Council tried to investigate, but their deep space sensors were nowhere near as advanced as the ones the humans had built. The human monitoring network had been quietly watching the spaces between stars for decades, but when they left, they had taken all their data with them. President Mina called another emergency session, but this time the mood was different. The usual political arguing was replaced by genuine fear. The galaxy was falling apart, and now there were hints of something even worse coming. We made a mistake, she said quietly. We thought the humans were the threat, but maybe they were the only thing keeping us safe. The first confirmed sighting came from a deep space probe near the galactic rim. Something huge was moving through the void between star systems. It was bigger than a moon, and it seemed to be heading toward inhabited space. The probe transmitted a few seconds of data, Before going silent, when the scientists analyzed the data, they found something that made them understand why the humans had been so secretive. The energy readings matched theoretical predictions in the human files. The creature was exactly what the humans had been preparing to fight. The void spawn were coming and humanity was gone. General Seok-jin had been dead for 6 months, but his ghost was haunting the galaxy. The files he had left behind in the human military database were the only thing standing between total panic and complete civilization collapse. His research on the void spawn was more detailed than anyone had imagined and more terrifying than anyone wanted to believe. The creature that had been spotted near the galactic rim was not alone. Deep space sensors were detecting movement in the dark between star systems. At least 6 more massive entities were approaching from different directions. They moved slowly but with terrible purpose, like ancient predators finally waking up after a long sleep. President Minna stood in the emergency command center that had been hastily built in the council chambers. The room was filled with military officers from every major species, but none of them had ever fought anything like this. The void spawn were not like pirates or enemy fleets. They were forces of nature that happened to be alive and hungry. According to Seok-jin's files, these creatures had appeared before in galactic history. Every 3,000 to 5,000 years they would emerge from the void between galaxies and begin consuming star systems. The ancient records called them different names, but they all described the same thing. Massive entities that fed on the energy of stars and left nothing but empty space behind. The files explain that previous galactic civilizations had survived these attacks, but only barely. They had required perfect coordination between all species, combined fleets numbering in the millions, and weapons specifically designed to hurt creatures that existed partially outside normal space. The cost had always been enormous, with entire species going extinct to stop the threat, but those ancient civilizations had been led by species that specialized in war and had spent centuries preparing. The current galaxy had been at peace for so long that most military forces were designed for keeping order, not fighting monsters. The first void spawn reached the outer territories of the Reptari Empire on a Tuesday. The creature was roughly the size of Earth's moon, but it moved through space like it was swimming through water. Its surface was black but covered with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. When it approached the star system of Kepler 186, something impossible happened. The star began to dim. Admiral Taesung watched the reports from his command ship in horror. He was the highest-ranking non-human military officer in the galaxy now that the humans were gone, but he felt completely out of his depth. The Reptari fleet under his command consisted of 200 warships, which sounded impressive until you saw what they were fighting. The void spawn was absorbing energy directly from the star like a cosmic parasite. The planets in the system were already getting colder as their sun grew weaker. The 5 million Reptari colonists on the inhabited worlds were sending desperate evacuation requests, but there were not enough ships to save them all. Fire all weapons, Admiral, someone shouted. The Reptari fleet opened fire with everything they had: plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, energy beams that could crack moons, missile volleys that could destroy space stations. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize a planet, but when it hit the void spawn, something terrifying happened. The creature absorbed the energy and grew slightly larger. Impossible, Taesung whispered, but the sensor readings were clear. The monster was not just immune to their weapons, it was feeding on them. Every shot they fired made it stronger. The evacuation ships tried to run, but hyperspace travel near the void spawn was impossible. The creature's presence warped space and time in ways that made faster than light travel dangerous. 3 evacuation ships that tried to jump to hyperspace simply vanished. The others were trapped in normal space with the monster within 6 hours. The star of Kepler 186 had dimmed to half its normal brightness. The planets were freezing and the colonists were dying. The void spawn had consumed enough energy to grow even larger, and its attention was turning to the next star system. Admiral Taesung ordered a full retreat, but he knew it was already too late. The creature was moving toward the heavily populated core worlds of the Reptari Empire. There were billions of people in its path and no way to stop it. The news of the first system's destruction spread across the galaxy faster than the speed of light. Panic began to set in as species realized that their combined military forces were useless against this threat. Some governments started building evacuation fleets, others tried to negotiate surrender with something that clearly did not communicate. President Minna called for unity, but unity was easier to demand than to achieve. The Aviari wanted to use their speed to hit-and-run tactics. The machine collectives believed in overwhelming firepower. The Silvani preferred precision strikes that targeted weak points, but the Void Spawn did not seem to have weak points, and every attack just made it stronger. Intelligence. Director Chan Wu of the Reptari Security Service was studying every piece of human data they could find. His team had been working around the clock trying to understand what the humans had planned to do. About this threat, the answer was both impressive and terrifying. The humans had not just known about the Void Spawn. They had been building a defense network for decades. Their strategic outposts that other species had complained about were actually early warning stations. Their aggressive expansion had been an attempt to create defensive perimeters. Their military buildup had been preparation for this exact scenario, but the most disturbing discovery was in the weapons research files. The humans had been developing something called Cascade resonance weapons that could theoretically hurt creatures that existed partially outside normal space. The theory was incredibly advanced, and the engineering requirements were beyond what any other species could achieve. They were decades ahead of us in weapons development. Chan Wu reported to his superiors they had solutions we had not even begun to imagine. Meanwhile, a second Void Spawn had entered the galaxy from a different direction. This one was heading toward the Silvani core worlds, where trillions of beings lived in massive city planets. The creature was even larger than the first one, and it moved with what almost looked like intelligence. Dr. Eugene was working frantically with a team of researchers trying to understand the human weapons data. They had found references to something called the Sol Defense Grid, a massive network of weapons and sensors built around Earth's solar system. The humans had apparently been preparing their home system to serve as a final fortress against exactly this kind of threat. But why did they not tell us? Eugene asked for the 100th time. Why keep it secret if they were trying to protect everyone? Her colleague Dr. Wu Jin had a theory that no one wanted to hear. Maybe they tried to tell the older species before. Maybe the ancient races knew about this threat and decided to ignore it. Maybe humanity realized that the galaxy would not take the threat seriously until it was too late. The evidence supported this theory. Human diplomatic records from early contact showed attempts to discuss deep space threats and defensive coordination, but the older species had dismissed these concerns as human paranoia or attempts to justify military expansion. The humans had tried to protect the galaxy through cooperation. When that failed, they had decided to protect themselves and let everyone else learn the hard way. A third Void Spawn appeared near the machine collective territories. This one began consuming the artificial intelligence networks that the machines used for communication. The collective sent their most advanced war platforms to fight it, but the creature simply absorbed their energy weapons and used their own power against them. The galaxy was beginning to understand that this was not a war, it was a natural disaster that happened to be alive. And the only species that had been preparing for it was the one they had exiled to their home system as. The fourth and fifth Void Spawn entered the galaxy from different directions. President Minna finally made the decision that should have been made months ago. She authorized an emergency transmission to the Sol system using every communication method available. The message was simple: we were wrong, we need help, please come back. But when they tried to send the message, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. Earth was no longer there. Sol system had vanished from the galaxy completely, as if it had never existed, and in the growing darkness between the stars more Void Spawn were stirring. Captain Han Wu had volunteered for the suicide mission because someone had to see what happened to Earth. His scout ship was the fastest vessel the Galactic Council could find, but it was still pathetic compared to human technology. The journey to where Sol system should have been took 3 weeks instead of the 5 days it would have taken a human ship. What he found there changed everything. The Sol system was not gone. It was hidden behind a barrier of energy that stretched across the entire solar system. The barrier was invisible to most sensors, but when Han Wu's ship got close enough, he could see it shimmering like heat waves. The energy readings were beyond anything in the galactic databases, but that was not the worst part surrounding the barrier. In perfect defensive formations were ships, millions of them, from tiny fighters no bigger than shuttles to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The vessels were clearly human in design, but they were like nothing that had existed when humanity left the galaxy. These were not the ships that had withdrawn from galactic space 18 months ago. These were something new, something that had been built in secret while the galaxy burned. Chief Engineer Nara worked frantically at her sensor station trying to analyze what they were seeing. The technology signatures were incredible. The human ships were using power sources that should not have been possible. Energy shielding that bent space itself, weapons that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Captain, the largest ship is 15 kilometers long, she reported with a voice full of awe. Our biggest dreadnought is 3 kilometers. These things are 5 times larger than anything we have ever built. The scout fleet tried to maintain a safe distance, but the human ships clearly knew they were there. A single vessel broke formation and approached them. It was sleek and deadly looking, with curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal. When it got close enough for communication, a message came through on all frequencies. This is Admiral Ji-hoon of the Human Defense Force. You have 30 seconds to explain why you are in Sol Space. The voice was calm and professional, but there was something underneath it that made Hyun-woo's skin crawl. It was the voice of someone who had been preparing for war and was no longer interested in diplomacy. Admiral, this is Captain Hyun-woo of the Galactic Council Emergency Fleet. Hyun-woo replied, we came to ask for help. The void spawn have entered the galaxy and we cannot stop them. There was a long pause before Ji-hoon responded. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. We know the void spawn entered the galaxy 47 hours ago. We have been tracking their movement since they crossed the galactic barrier. You chose to face them alone. Please, Admiral Hyun-woo begged. We made a mistake. We were wrong to exile humanity. We need your help. Another pause. Then Ji-hoon's ship moved closer, and Hyun-woo could see details that made him feel sick. The human vessel was covered in weapons that he did not recognize. Energy projectors that seemed to twist space around them, missile pods that contained warheads of unknown design, fighter bays that could launch hundreds of small craft. You made your choice 18 months ago, Ji-hoon said. The galaxy decided that humanity was too dangerous to remain among civilized species. You were correct. We are dangerous, but you misunderstood. With a communication channel switched to a wider frequency, and suddenly Hyun-woo could see inside the human ship. The bridge was enormous, with dozens of officers working at stations covered in displays. He could not read, but what caught his attention was Admiral Ji-hoon himself. The man looked like he had aged 20 years in 18 months. His hair was completely gray now, and his face was marked with lines of stress and sleepless nights, but his eyes were sharp and focused like a predator that had been waiting for prey. We knew the void spawn were coming, Ji-hoon continued. We had been preparing for their arrival for over a century. Our expansion into the galaxy was not conquest, it was the construction of early warning networks. Our military buildup was not aggression, it was preparation for this war. The truth hit Hyun-woo like a physical blow. Everything the galaxy had complained about had been humanity's attempt to protect them. The human colonies that had seemed to spring up everywhere had been monitoring stations watching for threats from deep space. The human fleets that had seemed too large and too aggressive had been the galaxy's first and last line of defense. We tried to explain the threat to the older species, Ji-hoon said, but they thought we were making excuses for imperialism. We tried to build a coordinated defense, but every species wanted to maintain their independence. We offered to share our defensive technology, but you were afraid we would use it to control you. Chief Engineer Nara was studying the readings from the human ships, and what she found made her feel dizzy. The power outputs were massive. The energy shields could probably withstand a direct hit from a supernova. The weapons systems were designed to fight things that existed partially outside normal space. These ships were built specifically to fight the void spawn. Captain Nara whispered, how long would it take to build a fleet like this? If we started today, she replied, with our current technology, maybe 50 years. If we had human technology, maybe 20 years. But they would have had to start building this fleet decades ago. The implications were staggering. Humanity had been secretly preparing for this war since before They made first contact with the galaxy. Everything they had done, every expansion, every alliance, every technological development had been part of a plan to defend against an enemy that most species did not even know existed. So when the galaxy voted to exile us, Ji-hoon continued, we simply accelerated our timeline. We had hoped to have another 20 years to prepare, but your decision forced us to abandon the outer defense networks and concentrate everything here. In Sol System, Admiral Ji-hoon's ship moved even closer, and Hyun-woo could see the true scale of the human fleet stretching out in all directions. There were not just millions of ships, there were tens of millions. Small patrol craft cruised between massive battle stations that looked like artificial moons. Carrier ships the size of asteroids launched swarms of fighters that moved in perfect coordination. This was not just a fleet, this was the largest military force that had ever existed in the galaxy, and it had been built in secret while the rest of the galaxy argued about trade routes and mining rights. We could have shared this defense with you, Ji-hoon said, but you chose to see us as the enemy. You decided that human ambition was more dangerous than the things that hunt in the dark between galaxies. Now you will face the void spawn with your own resources. Please, Hyun-woo tried again. There are trillions of innocent lives at stake. Ji-hoon's expression did not change. There were trillions of innocent lives at stake 18 months ago, when you voted to exile us. Did you think about them when you decided humanity was too dangerous to exist in your galaxy? The communication channel went quiet for several minutes. Hyun-woo could see Admiral Ji-hoon talking to his officers, but the audio was cut. They seemed to be having an intense discussion with displays showing the positions of the void spawn and the desperate attempts by galactic forces to stop them. Finally, Ji-hoon returned to the channel. A galaxy chose to govern itself without human interference. He said, you will get exactly what you asked for. We will not intervene in galactic affairs. We will defend Sol System and nothing else. But Admiral, what about the colonies, the research stations, the billions of humans living throughout the galaxy? All human citizens were recalled 18 months ago, Ji-hoon replied. Anyone who chose to remain behind made their own decision. We cannot protect people who chose to reject human protection. The scout fleet tried to send more messages, but the human ships had gone silent. The massive fleet continued its patrol around the Sol barrier, ignoring the desperate aliens who had come begging for help. As Captain Hyun-woo's ship began the long journey back to Council space, he realized that humanity had not retreated in defeat. They had withdrawn to prepare for a war that the galaxy was not ready to fight, and now the galaxy would face the void spawn alone while humanity watched from behind their impenetrable defenses, waiting to see if the species that had exiled them would survive their own arrogance. President Jin-ae stood in the command center of the massive space station hidden in the Kuiper Belt, watching displays that showed the death of civilizations. The void spawn had consumed 7 star systems in the past month and were accelerating toward the populated core worlds of the galaxy behind her. The greatest secret in human history hummed with quiet activity. The Arc project had taken 200 years to complete. Massive ships, each one the size of a small moon, that contained not just human refugees but genetic samples from every species that had ever existed in the galaxy. Humanity had been secretly preserving the biodiversity of the entire galaxy, preparing for exactly this kind of catastrophe. Navigation Officer Sang-ho approached with the latest reports from the outer sensors. His face was grim as he handed over the data tablet. The Sovani homeworld has 6 hours before the largest void spawn reaches their system. The evacuation fleets are overwhelmed. They cannot save even 1% of the population. Jin-ae studied the numbers with the cold calculation of someone who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. 47 billion Sovani were about to die. The species that had led the vote to exile humanity would be extinct by tomorrow. The irony was not lost on her. The Reptari are requesting immediate assistance, Communications Officer Yoonji reported. They are offering to surrender their entire fleet to human command in exchange for protection. Their government has collapsed and their military is in full retreat. Jin-ae nodded but did not respond. The requests for help had been coming in for weeks from every major species in the galaxy. The proud civilizations that had voted to contain humanity were now begging for salvation from the very people they had tried to eliminate. Unji continued, "We are receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council President." Minna herself put it through the main display, showed the Galactic Council chambers, but they looked nothing like the Grand Hall where humanity had been exiled 18 months ago. The crystal walls were cracked. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across alien faces that looked desperate and afraid. Most of the seats were empty as species after species had withdrawn to defend their homeworlds. Present Minna looked like she had aged decades in the past few months. Her elegant robes were rumpled and her eyes were red from crying. She spoke in a voice that shook with emotion. "President Jin'e of humanity, I am speaking on behalf of what remains of galactic civilization. We acknowledge our mistake. We acted in fear and prejudice when we should have listened to your warnings. We formally apologize for our treatment of your species." Jin'e watched without expression as the alien leader continued, "We know we have no right to ask for your help after what we did to you, but there are trillions of innocent beings who will die if the void spawn are not stopped. Children who played no part in our decision, families who never voted to exile humanity. Please, I am begging you to help us." The transmission ended and the command center fell silent. Jin'e could feel the eyes of her senior staff on her, waiting for her decision. She had been preparing for this moment since she was a child, growing up on the secret military stations where humanity had built their real civilization. Admiral Taman stepped forward. He was the architect of the human withdrawal and the mastermind behind the Soul Defense Grid. His voice was carefully neutral as he spoke. "Ma'am, we have the capability to stop the void spawn. Our cascade resonance weapons are ready for deployment. The fleet is at full strength. We could save the galaxy." But Jin'e could hear the unspoken question in his voice. Should they save the galaxy that had rejected them? She walked to the central display that showed the positions of the void spawn and the failing defenses of the galactic species. The creatures were moving with terrible purpose, consuming everything in their path. The combined fleets of 47 species had barely managed to slow down. One creature, Dr. Sunya, approached from her station at the biological monitoring section. "Ma'am, the genetic archives are complete. We have preserved samples from every known species, including the ones that are about to go extinct. If we choose not to intervene, we can still ensure that galactic biodiversity survives." Jin'e understood the implication. Even if they let the current civilizations die, humanity could eventually repopulate the galaxy with all the species that had existed before. The Ark project was not just about preservation, it was about replacement. The choice before her was simple. She could save the galaxy that had exiled humanity, or she could let it burn and build a new one under human leadership. President Minna's transmission was still playing on repeat in the background, her desperate voice echoing through the command center. Jin'e thought about the vote 18 months ago. The overwhelming majority that had decided humanity was too dangerous to exist among civilized species. Not one alien voice had been raised in their defense, but she also thought about the children Minna had mentioned, the families who had never voted to exile anyone, the billions of innocent beings who would die because their leaders had made a terrible mistake. Communications Officer Yunji spoke quietly. "Ma'am, we are detecting massive void spawn movement toward the galactic core. If they reach the core systems, the death toll will be in the quadrillions." Jin'e closed her eyes and made the decision that would determine the future of the galaxy. "Open a channel to all galactic governments," she ordered. The transmission went out on every frequency to every surviving world in the galaxy. Jin'e's image appeared on screens in government centers, military command posts, and refugee camps across dozens of star systems. "I am President Jin'e of the Human Federation," she began. Her voice was calm and steady, but carried the weight of absolute authority. "The galaxy chose to exile humanity because you believed we were too dangerous to exist among civilized species. You were correct. We are dangerous, but not in the way you imagined." The display behind her showed the human fleet emerging from hyperspace near the first void spawn, thousands of human ships moving in perfect formation toward the creature that had consumed 7 star systems. "We are dangerous because we are willing to do what others cannot or will not do. We are dangerous because we prepare for threats that others ignore. We are dangerous because when civilization fails, we are the ones who rebuild it." The human fleet engaged the void spawn with weapons that seemed to tear holes in space itself. The creature that had been unstoppable suddenly found itself under attack by forces it could not absorb or redirect. The cascade resonance. Weapons disrupted its ability to exist partially outside normal space, forcing it fully into reality where it could be destroyed. Humanity accepts the galaxy's unconditional surrender. Jin continued, all species will submit to human protection. Protocols immediately. There will be no negotiation, no conditions, no democracy. We will save your civilization, but we will do it under human authority. The transmission showed human fleets moving to engage all 6 remaining void spawns simultaneously. It was the largest military operation in galactic history, and it was being executed with precision that bordered on the supernatural. Your governments are dissolved, your military commands are ended, your independence is forfeit. In exchange, humanity will protect you from threats you cannot imagine and guide you toward a future you could never achieve alone. One by one, the responses came back from the surviving governments. Unconditional surrender from the Reptari Empire, total capitulation from the Suvani Confederation, complete submission from the Aviari flocks. The machine collectives, the Aquatic Federation, even the proud mineraloid clans all sent the same message: we surrender. As the last void spawn fell to human weapons and the galaxy was saved, Jin looked out at the stars that now belonged to humanity. The age of alien independence was over. The species that had tried to exile humanity had succeeded only in proving they needed human leadership to survive. The galaxy would be rebuilt, but it would be rebuilt humanity's way. And this time, when the darkness came from the void between stars, humanity would be ready.